So where we left off in the last tutorial is when we applied our bevel and emboss layer style. So now what we're going to do is add an additional layer style so you can see some of the other non-destructive properties, but also we can cover a different layer style in the list. So what I'm going to do is when that layer is selected, I can double click in the empty area, and then that will launch my layer styles options box, and then I can highlight bevel and emboss just to check the parameters and the adjustments we made to it, and then of course you can see that I have the contour and texture applied. So now the cool thing about layer styles is you can use them either independently, so I just have one applied with some sub styles applied to that, but then also I have the entire list of layer styles at my disposal. So if I wanted to add a drop shadow now, let's say I wanted to separate this or create separation between it and the background, I can then highlight and check the drop shadow layer style. And then if I scroll upward, you can see bevel and emboss is still checked, so I can add them independently as groups, or I can just use them individually. So now you can see when I have my preview box checked, I can see the drop shadow added. Now on this white background, my drop shadow isn't so visible because it's got a multiply blending mode on it and it's blending with white. And it also has a 35% transparency. So you can see those are your general blending options. You have your blending modes and opacity. And then notice I have my angle. So it's set check to use global light. But notice this has a different slider because I don't have that altitude setting. So I have a slightly different radius plan here. But then when I move my drop shadow, notice that my bevel and emboss moves with my drop shadow because I have that use global light checkbox checked. So this is very useful because now it's updating the bevel and emboss while I update my drop shadow so I don't have to jump back and forth constantly. Really nice attribute and really nice way to unify your light direction. So that's the same as the bevel and emboss feature. Now drop shadow has a little bit of different attributes down here because I have my shadow distance. So now I'm creating a layer style that is somewhat independent of my pixel graphic or my text layer in this case. So when I increase my distance of my drop shadow, what it effectively is doing with kind of like an illusion is by creating a distance between my shadow and my layer, I am creating distance between that layer on the page, or in this case, my canvas background. So the distance allows me to control that. But again, distance is the unit of measure for my distance is pixels, so it's dependent on your working document space, and it's dependent on the pixel size of the graphic you're using. So all of the settings that are pixel related are relative to my document and my graphic. Now spread is relative to the size, the relative size of my shadow and how it kind of softens over the area. So I have to increase my size to see better percentages of spread when I'm working with a small amount of drop shadow. So what I'm going to do is make my drop shadow larger and fuzzier, and then when I change the spread percentage, then you'll be able to see what it does more. So as I make the size of my drop shadow larger, spread allows me to either soften or harden my shadow. So if you had, noonday sun overhead, you'd have a nice hard edge shadow, or direct sunlight, you'd have a hard shadow. And then if I had overcast skies and it was about to rain, I'd have a very soft and almost imperceptible shadow. So basically you can create all the different shadow types based on light types using distance, spread, and size. So very powerful there because basically you have all that control to create a shadow any way you want it. And then lastly, if you're working with a pixel graphic in the background, not just a white canvas layer, what I can do is change the color of my shadow. So if I click on the color picker icon, it opens up the color picker Dropbox for my drop shadow. And then I have all of those powerful attributes to create any kind of color I want to help it mix into the background, either with the background graphic or help control my blending mode. Now, again, as I mentioned before, to remember, once I commit to that, press OK for the black, and once I want to commit to my drop shadow, I'll press OK. So now you can see I have a very soft drop shadow separating my type from the background with all of its texture, and the light direction is in the same direction as my bevel and emboss. And then my drop shadow is added to the list here underneath my layer. So this list populates in the order that it is in your layer styles panel. So bevel and emboss was first, drop shadow was at the bottom, so they go in that order until you start adding them. Now if I wanted to see these parts of the graphic, here's the second level of non-destructive. I can now turn them off individually because I have more than one. So if I wanted to see it without the bevel and emboss on it, I just click the visibility icon and it turns off. So now I see how it looks less textured, but still with the drop shadow. And then I can turn bevel and emboss back on and turn the drop shadow off to see if I like the separation from the background or not, or if it's distracting with my graphics in the background. So all of those things, and then globally turn them off, just like we did in the first tutorial. I just click on the effects visibility icon and it turns off all the layer styles. So you have complete non-destructive effects that you can apply to your layers this way. So in the next tutorial, we're going to cover the last layer style for this first portion, and then we're going to conclude how to then apply these to other layers more quickly and efficiently.